welcome to this week's episode. I'm filming this a day before my mother's birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. I love you. And welcome, you flyers, riders, and riders. It's good to see you. Hopefully, your flight in had no turbulence. This will be a fun episode coming towards the end of the book. We've only got about another episode and a half. Hopefully, we'll have something in between as well before we get into book 2. This is going pretty quick, so if you guys will have a suggestion for after this series, let me know. Other than that, let's get into this week's episode. Chapter 27, Do Not Disturb. Last week we had left off with Liz, Lucy, and David meeting a new character, Sophie, who works out at the wildlife hospital. She gave them her contact information just in case they did catch Conker and needed help getting him back to health. Now, on to the next chapter. And surprise, surprise, the raindrops keep falling on my head. They keep falling. It's raining again. David is home, and it's not raining as hard. It's more of a drizzle, but he decides to go to college, and he's extremely distracted. His head's not in it. He's having a lot of ideas for his story, and he wants to get home to write real quick. He goes to a lecture on, global cooling during some prehistoric era. Then he goes to geography, and that's when he knows his heart just isn't in it today. So he decides to call it a half day, runs home. He can hear Liz and Lucy upstairs doing some work, and he doesn't want to be disturbed. So he writes that "Do Not Disturb" sign, plasters it up on his door real quick. He can hear Lucy walking down and plants herself in front of his door as soon as she sees the sign. Liz and Lucy go back and forth. Lucy wants to know what's going on and why she can't go in. And Liz says that sometimes work has to be done, and even if it's polite, you shouldn't interrupt somebody that doesn't want to be. She says, "Come on, let's go. We need to go do laundry." And they go to hang up the laundry on the drying line. David looks over at Gazooks and says, "It's time to get started, buddy." He starts typing away. And in his story, he's typing that Conker and Snigger are waking up in the watering can. They're talking to each other, making a plan to get to the other side. They peer out, find a little hole in a fence. And as Snigger's looking through, he can tell that the nut box, David's trap that he had set up, is on the far side of the other garden. And they can either go way along it, or they can make a straight shot through it, even though it's wide open. Conker gets a little bit nervous because he says that he's not sure he can make it. He's pretty weak. Snigger notices that he's crawling, has a hard time even walking, really, just to the hole in the fence. He has to help push him through. And once they get through, they can map it out and plan it. They see a bird feeder that's just a couple feet away. And then from there, there's the clothesline hanger. Snigger's doing some scouting, making sure that there's no birds or anything. And then out of nowhere, David gets interrupted. His story stops. Boom. He can hear Liz and Lucy going, "Hey, what's going on over there?" David lifts his head from his computer to look out. He doesn't see anything going on. Liz and Lucy are out of sight on the corner of the house. But over on the fence line, there's nothing either. So he goes back to work. He goes back to typing. He has the squirrels bolting out, going under the bird feeder first to be safe, a good little checkpoint. And then he planned on having them bolt out again, and he loses inspiration. He's not sure what to do, where to go. He had an idea, but he's not sure how to get there. So he's thinking, he's looking outside, and Bonington's acting a little weird. He's a little agitated, staring straight outside as if something's going on. He's going back and forth between the windowsill and David's door, pawing at it, trying to get it open. David does not connect the dots, and my first thought here, actually I had a couple of first thoughts here. I guess they're not first thoughts, but I had a couple of thoughts / notes. One of the thoughts was, David did set up Bonington to be the garden guardian. And I so I thought Bonington had taken that to heart and just wanted to get out because he was either trying to get the squirrels or maybe he sensed that the crow was there. Wasn't too sure. And then the other one is I'm not really sure why they're hanging up clothes. From my from what I understand, it was still raining. They had never mentioned that the weather had gotten better. He had spent a couple hours in school. And here the weather does change very quickly. You need to wear shorts and a sweater at all times. But to be hanging up clothes in the rain, I mean, what's going on? I was also wondering about Lucy's father. There's been no mention of him whatsoever. Not even a mention of if Liz was ever married, what the father could have done, where he's at. There's no mention of David's parents either. We're in a very vacuum story where there's three main characters. We've got Mr. Bacon and now Sophie, but only a few named and then mentioned of just other citizens out in the town. I'm starting to question where everyone is. I want to know the lore. I want to have a little bit more of a fleshed out world. I don't know if Scrubley's a real place over in England or if this is something that he's making up, but it seems like a very close world to our own. They have libraries, they have cars, they have college. It sounds pretty modern. I haven't really heard too much about a TV there, so I don't know if this was written in maybe the 90s and he put it out in the early 2000s, or if maybe TVs just aren't a big thing. Maybe he's living in a rural area and again just writing what he knows. But it just makes me wonder what he's writing about, what type of world they live in. Oh, they have computers. They have computers, but no mentions of TVs. Maybe programming isn't the highest quality. I don't know. You tell me. That's my bad. As David's looking for inspiration, he thinks about Gadzooks. He pictures him in his mind's eye, and in that flash, Gadzooks has, sharpened his pencil, has a fresh piece of paper on his pads. He's looking much better than when we last seen him. So, David and him must have made up that little pep talk that he gave to him last episode. Must have done him some good. And Gadzooks just writes down real quick, shows David, and it says Bonington. Kind of confuses David. Not sure where that goes. And out of nowhere, they hear a bang. Liz tells Lucy to go get David, quick. David looks up, doesn't really notice anything. Bonington is starting to get more agitated, pawing to get out of David's room. And Lucy starts popping up. She's running over, and as soon as David opens the door, she says, "He's here." "Well, who's here? What's going on?" Lucy says, "It's Krakitus. The crow, he's here." David's too stunned to do anything. He doesn't know what to say. He's just silent. And he looks over at Gadzooks because that was David's plan, is he wanted to somehow get the crow involved, but he didn't know how to get there. And Gadzooks gave him the name Bonington, and so he said, "You knew. You tried to give me a warning." David was, again, just sluggish, doesn't know what to think. Lucy's pulling him by the hand, then they start to run outside. Chapter 28, Conker Found. As David emerges from the house, Liz tries to catch him up quickly. She goes on and describes almost word for word what David was typing up in his room. David is still stunned and not knows what to think, but he's watching what's going on. Snigger jumps out from under the bird feeder and is out in the complete open. The crow comes swooping by and Snigger barely escapes. David and Liz have to stop Lucy and hold her back because she doesn't want to get hurt. Now David just is sitting and watching in disbelief. As David is frozen, he decides to take action. He jumps up and he's like, "I need to have Sniggers back." So he goes and grabs the hose and he's pointed over at the crow to make sure that he doesn't grab Snigger. And out of nowhere, Bonington jumps up. The crow's about to launch and Bonington swipes at him. And David's watching everything go on. The crow then gets scared and flies into one of Liz's sweaters that's hanging up on the line and gets caught. Its talons are caught in threads and everything, and it's just hanging there, swinging, flopping around. And he sees Bonington going to swipe at it again. And David doesn't have any desire to see anything die today, and he goes to squirt Bonington instead. And when he squeezes the trigger, he realizes that he never turned on the water. So he throws that down, and right as Bonington's about to pounce, he catches him just by the scruff of his neck. It was really, really good timing. I wish if that was a TV, if that was a movie shot, I imagine that going slow motion just in the nick of time. Big old worried face on the crow. Maybe animated, that'd be better. I'd love to see the cuts. So anyway, after that, David hands Bonington over to Liz, and she's holding him back. Bonington's freaking out, trying to get to the crow. David picks up the crow, or doesn't pick him up, but clamps down on his wings to his body softly, but so that he can't get away, and he tells Lucy to help him. Lucy gets pretty upset and confused about why we're helping this bird, and David says that nothing deserves to die just for doing what nature had created them to do. And so Lucy understands and starts unwrapping the crow's foot. And she stops when she gets to one of the toes. She notices that it's been cut off and there's a little scar there. She says, "Look, David, it's just like your story. Your story is real." And David said, "There's no way. Maybe I just seen that and subconsciously wrote about it." And Lucy doesn't quite understand what the subconsciously means, so as David's trying to explain it, he just boils it down to, look, alright, it was just Gadzooks. He helped me. I couldn't think of anything, thought of him, he wrote it on his pad. Lucy finishes untangling the crow's foot from all of the sweater threads, and David swings it back into the air and lets it go. But there's no sign of any of the squirrels. They're looking for him. They don't see anything. And Lucy points and says, "Hey, look at that. There's a big old clump in one of David's pant legs that's hanging up on the line." So David goes over there and clamps both sides of it so that it can't get out. Liz helps him, undoes the clips on the top, and they walk it over carefully to the trap. And then David, lets go of the one pant leg end that they can shake it into. And once they're looking around, they realize that that's only one of the squirrels. It kind of worries David and especially Lucy. So they're looking around. David looks at the squirrel that they caught, and he knows that it was Snigger, but he just wants to confirm, and it's got two healthy eyes. So as they're looking, they know that it can't be too high. They're looking on the ground everywhere. Nothing's going on. And they just hear a loud meow. Almost angry, prideful meow. They look over at Bonington that's laying straight in the middle of the garden in between them and the bird feeder where the two squirrels had been. And in his little paws pinned down to the ground and in between his teeth is a limp squirrel. That's where this chapter ends. And man, that's just a heartbreaker, dude. You do all of this work just to try to help and save this thing, and nature was going one way, trying to take it out with the bird. And you can't find nature. The great quote from Jurassic Park: "Nature finds a way." And it's only fitting that a cat is gonna catch the rodent, man. I really thought Bonington was going to be the hero, and it looked like it when he was starting to, defend and attack the bird. But a cat's gonna cat. What are you going to do? Poor Lucy. It's going to be hard to deal with. There's been no confirmation on whether the squirrel's alive or not. We don't know if it's dead. Seeing that it's the end of the chapter, though, who knows? That's rough, buddy. That's rough. One of my first thoughts coming into this when they turn around and see Bonington with them in his teeth is silence, and then "Hey, yo, what the meme?" He's like, "Why ain't there no cheese?" I don't know. It's just tough, man. After all that, there's nothing to say other than what the. Chapter 29, The Wildlife Hospital. Bonington just pads over and proudly presents his spoils to the family. They're absolutely silent and stunned. Lucy falls into her mother's arms and starts to cry. Liz asks if it's still alive, and David has to examine it. The way that it's laying, David can only see its one good eye. It is closed, but it's not damaged, so he can't confirm that this is Conker or not. As he goes to grab the squirrel to gently roll it over, it starts to spasm out and just twitching everywhere as if it's almost having a seizure. After 15 seconds of shaking, which is genuinely a long time, like if a human was having a seizure for 15 seconds, you're concerned at that point about brain damage, so for a tiny squirrel to be doing that for 15 seconds, that's crazy, man. How? But so David gets to roll it over and he sees that this is Conker. He's got a little bit of damage, not a little bit. He's able to see that this is Conker. His eyes messed up. He's picking him up. He's barely breathing, but he is still alive. So David brings him and picks him up, puts him back into the trap as well. Lucy's too stunned to say anything, but Liz just tells David it's time to call Sophie. Liz tells David that he's got a call from Sophie. Lucy jumps up and runs over to the phone first, trying to tell her that they caught him. They've got him. Liz is a good wingman, grabs the phone out and hands it over to David. David gets the address, makes a plan, and they all start heading over there. Lucy is very unimpressed when they head out. They pass a couple of farms, and when they turn onto this dirt road, they keep driving, and there's nothing going on. They see a couple of goats, some ducks, a cat in a wheelbarrow just enjoying the sun. As they park and they're starting to go into the hospital, they see Sophie rolling up with a horse. They describe her as the typical little horse girl. She's got those boots, some riding pants on, a little helmet. She introduces her horse as Major to Lucy. Lucy gets super excited and wants to go riding. Liz says no, that's not what they're here for. And Sophie kind of encourages it and says, well, we've got ponies, which makes Lucy go off the handles. And Liz says, no, we're here for squirrels. So Sophie hands off the reins to one of her co-workers, has a quick conversation, and leads them into the actual hospital where they meet Mrs. Wynnum. Mrs. Wynnum then has kind of a tough conversation with Lucy and David, saying that, they're a hospital and they're happy to take care of injured and sick animals, but healthy ones, they don't really have the resources for. They're ran off of donations and just don't have, the money. And so Lucy's sitting there begging they have to stay together. Snigger's been here helping Conker the whole time. They can't just kick him to the curb. And so they're going back and forth, and the nurse needs to take a look at the squirrel, see what's going on. David explains that they think that the crow got them. They're not positive. And when the nurse is looking at the eye, she definitely says that it's infected, and they need to get that checked out by the vet tomorrow. Liz says that they'll pay for anything that needs to happen. And Sophie says, like she just explained, it's all off of donations. So really, David already did, looking over him with a cute little smile. As the nurse and Lucy are going back and forth, Sophie talks to David about, hey, grab the cage. I have a plan. And runs out to a certain type of cage. She's going back and forth with Mrs. Wynnum, saying that this cage would be perfect because it's big enough and it's not going to bother any of the other animals. And there shouldn't be any problems because this was an oak tree. Not an oak tree, but it was a little shed that had oak branches in it and a bunch of acorns, so they don't need to be feeding them. As they're watching these squirrels jump around, Mrs. Wynnum is talking with Liz and Lucy. Sophie and David are kind of having a moment in the back. And she says, I just really appreciate people that care about animals. And David's starting to get the hint just slowly. She almost has to say it and spell it out for him to ask her out. And David starts saying, well, would you like to? Lucy interrupts and saying, yeah, they can stay. She convinced Wynnum fully to let them stay until, they're just both healthy. And she's asking Sophie, please, 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 will you please keep us informed? Just let us know. And Sophie puts her at ease, tells her, just calm down. I'll take this as a personal project, and I'll call you with any news whatsoever. That seems to make Lucy satisfied. They all say their goodbyes and head their separate ways. That brings us to the end. And I've been to a wildlife sanctuary. We've got one here, I would say maybe 2 hours away from us. It's more like a a safari than anything. Like they had a zebra out there. We saw some bears. There was a lion, and we're just out in Oregon. Nothing crazy. So an animal hospital would be fun. We've got a lot of volunteer vets around here. Outdoor recreation, activities is huge, and a lot of people have dogs. Or I mean, I've seen people walking cats on leashes lately, but they take their animals with them. So this is something we're very familiar with. I've been around animals my whole life. I remember a long time ago when my sister, uh, we went fishing and we found a couple of ducks, and there was one that was just it kind of sounds a lame duck, was just sitting there, couldn't move, didn't run away. And then we saw it had a little bit of blood, and we didn't know what we were doing. We picked it up, we took it home, and my sister was pretty upset about it, but wanted to help it in any way we could. And so when we got it home, my stepdad stitched it up as best as he could. We're not vets. We probably should have taken it to a vet, but at the time, we didn't have the money, so we were just trying to do what we could. We kept it for, I want to say, like 2 or 3 days, and it started feeling better, I think. It wasn't getting weaker, and it was eating and drinking. So we eventually took it back out to this fireman's pond that we have, where we see a lot of ducks, and, it swam away. So, in my mind, I like to think that it lived. It might have died from infection or so, who knows? Life happens, but I like to think that we did a good thing. But so animal rehabilitation, it takes a lot. You don't save them all the time, and it's tough when you watch them go. But it sounds like this is a good place where they let animals run free. There was no mention of any fences other than the main one that goes around the entire property. So it's very peaceful. All right, let's get into the next chapter. Chapter 30. Oh, Sophie. 4 days later, Liz says Sophie rang for David. David has a funny moment where any young man, when he's scrambling, doesn't know what to do trying to talk to a lady. Even though he knows it's a phone call, he looks for his comb, brushes his hair real quick, and then runs to the phone. When he gets there, Lucy had already beaten him to it. She had ripped the phone out of Liz's hand, and is just bombarding Sophie with a bunch of questions. How's Conker doing? Is he okay? Is he alive? Sophie doesn't even get to respond before Liz rips the phone out of Lucy's hand, hands it over to David. When David gets to the phone, Liz ushers Lucy away so that David could have some privacy. He wasn't on the phone very long. He comes out, and Liz asks him how the conversation went. David looks kind of puzzled and says that Sophie's actually just going to come over. This turns Liz on her head. She goes full mom mode. She tells Lucy to get the plates and starts just cooking a whole bunch of food. A couple of hours goes by and David comes out and he sees that Liz has put out a custard, another type of dessert type pie. I'm not too familiar with what it is. I'm sure it's more of an English thing. I'll have to edit it in and see what it is. But then she also put out little sandwiches that are tuna and cucumber. Now, when I think of brunch, we've gone on a couple of like little tea dates, and I love those little like cream cheese with cucumber and maybe some light lunch meat in there too. Those are some good sandwiches. Easy, I could pound like 5 of those little triangles that they give you, but the English have some interesting food options. Cucumber and tuna, beans and toast, and potatoes for every meal. Like, oh man, this is the second time where it makes me feel bad. I wish I could share the food trucks that we have here. Much better serve you. So Sophie comes over and they're talking. Lucy's trying to get in a question every 2 seconds just to see what's going on and how the squirrels are doing. You can see that Sophie's holding back a little bit and doesn't want to talk quite yet. So they sit down around the table and Sophie tells them that they have a little bit of good news and bad news. That makes Lucy pretty shocked. She sits down and gives her undivided attention to Sophie. She's mostly talking to Lucy, but glancing at David every now and then. She's talking about how the vet came over and looked at Conker's eye, and the good news is that it's not as bad as they thought. They were able to clean out all the hardened pus and everything and get him antibiotics, and he's actually not blind. It's still savable. That gets Lucy really excited and happy, but it makes David curious what the bad news is then. Sophie says the reason why it took so long, 4 days, to get back to them is because they had to run blood work and see if there was anything else going on. When they got the answers, she says that Conker has kidney failure. Lucy doesn't quite understand. Liz is putting it together, and David is kind of quiet. He thinks for a bit, and he asks, so is he gonna die? Sophie is very soft about it, but does confirm, yes, this will cause him to die. And Lucy gets very sad. She falls into her mother's arms, goes very, very quiet. David is trying to ask a couple of questions, but Sophie doesn't have a real timeline on when. She said that other than that, he's in pretty good health, so it could be anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of months. But she says that he looks happy. He's been bouncing around, and they've been having a hard time keeping track of them because they're squirrels, and they tend to gnaw on things and dig and burrow, and it's hard to keep a hold of them. So Snigger got out, and this made David pretty upset. Sophie was also talking about how when the vet came over and they were asking questions, the vet told him that squirrels are classified as pests, especially the gray squirrel, and when you catch one, you can't release it back out into the wild. They're talking about how it's not a good thing for them to be held up into a house as a pet. Lucy was trying to think of ideas for them to be kept safe, and that necessarily being in the garden probably wasn't the best idea for them either. And so Sophie's kind of leading them in a direction, and Liz can tell, so she asks what else is going on. And Sophie says that she's glad that they feel the way that they shouldn't be locked up and they should be free, and because Snigger got out. This makes David pretty upset. He keeps going, I told you to watch him. I told you he was tricky. You should have. I told you. Sophie's just taking it. Lucy gets excited because she says that he's going to go back to the gardens. Liz tells her that's maybe not the most logical thing because they're a far long way, and she had a hard time finding the farm when she needed to. So as they're going on and on, Sophie actually looks up and says it gets a little worse, guys. We lost both of them. Conker got out too. And that was David's last straw. He starts getting his shoes on, getting his coat, saying that they need to go find him immediately because they're not going to survive. How could they? They're so far out there. Conker's been injured and sick for a while and just doesn't have the strength. And so before David could get out of the door, Sophie tells him in a very stern voice, "Oh, David, sit down." Both David and Liz were pretty surprised by the tone of voice. And David listens. He kind of stumbled around, stepped in Bonington's cat bowl on accident. And when he sat down, Sophie said that it's okay. I was ready. They're asking questions. What do you mean you're ready? What was going on? What happened? And she said, I was waiting on the other side with a trap. And she says that she didn't tell anybody. It's just her. And she had a cat with mesh on it, or not a cat, but a cat cage with little mesh on it holding two squirrels. And she says, oh yeah, they're in the back of my car. And then Lucy gets super excited and says, I want to go see them right now. That's the end of the chapter. And that feels pretty good. It's the great escape. We can see that Sophie's a pretty good person. She just wants to help out this little girl that's having a great time saving squirrels. She doesn't want to see them to be put down either. I don't think that an animal hospital would put down squirrels. It's not like they're the pound for dogs or anything, but I think they probably would have kept them at the hospital, maybe put them up in some tree or maybe just in a cage there too, which would be sad. That would be one of the worst ways to live the rest of your life. I don't know how long a squirrel lives. I could imagine maybe like 3 or 4 years, maybe. You guys tell me. But so this makes me wonder what their plan is now that they have them, and Sophie's part of this whole conspiracy now. She's going to get caught up in it, but she's in it for the long haul, and it seems to be her plan. And you got to think on your toes now. Where are we going? Chapter 31, Decision Time. Lucy gets excited and says that we need to take them to the library gardens now. But before, she's got to use the bathroom. So she runs up and starts getting ready. And as she's upstairs, the adults have to talk. Liz looks at Sophie and David questioningly, saying, "Hey, what's the real plan, guys? We got to do something with these squirrels." David and Sophie weigh the pros and cons on taking them out to the wild, letting them go out here in the gardens, or taking them to the library. And they say that if they could take them out to the wild, Conker hasn't been out there and isn't strong enough to survive on his own. Versus if they leave him here in the garden, they're more likely to face either Mr. Bacon on one side or the crow over here in the Penny Kennels garden. So they're not really safe. But if they go to the library gardens, the squirrels there are fed by a lot of the tourists, not tourists, the squirrels there are fed by a lot of the people and the visitors. They're pretty safe, and there's already a ton of them there. So they could be accepted and run around. When Lucy comes down, Liz agrees to take them. They hop into Liz's car, and they're just riding along. Liz is talking to Sophie, and she recognizes the Penny Kettle's little clay dragons and the ones sold on the market. Sophie says that she's been wanting to get one for a while, just hasn't had the money. Liz offers a little quick tour around the dragon's den when Sophie has time or if they get back. Sophie gets pretty excited, but David says it's invitation only. It gets pretty salty that Sophie was invited so quick. When Sophie says she wants to check out the dragon's den, she lets out a little roar. David corrects her and goes, "It's not a roar, it's more like a hurring sound." Liz flashes a silent look at David in the rearview mirror, and David knew it wasn't a trick of the light, a flash in the mirror, but Liz's eyes flashed from green to violet. Just as he was noticing that change, they were starting to roll up to the gardens, and Liz parked. They got out and started heading to the garden. That's the end of that chapter. So there's obviously some connection between the Penny Kettles, Guinevere, and the dragon from back in the story, because from what I can remember, the girl had red hair and green eyes, just like these girls, but the dragon was the one with violet eyes. So some way, somehow, this dragon bonded with Guinevere, and then gave descendants down. This is my theory. Is that what happened? We just know that the dragon and her communicated. We didn't see what happened after, or did she live? What? I'm sure we'll get those answers later. On to the next chapter. Chapter 32, Bye Bye Conker. Liz takes Lucy and walks up ahead on the path, giving David and Sophie some private time to talk. David and Sophie are having a little bit of a moment. Sophie talking about how she appreciates people that take care of animals. It's come up quite a few times. In the middle of it, Lucy interrupts him halfway through. In the middle of it, Lucy interrupts him, tells him to take a picture. Sophie and David get close, snap a quick pic. Lucy makes fun of them, but find Liz up ahead, who had found a perfect place to release the squirrels. There was a part in the path that had a little half wall that opened up with some trees. So there's plenty of bushes and places for squirrels and everything to hang out. They all gather around, and David tells Lucy it's time and that she has the honors, just like last time. So as they open the door, Snigger jumps out first and bounces away, straight down the wall, and waits in the opening, turning back and looking at the group. There's no movement from Conker. He's still at the back of the trap, just waiting. David tells Lucy to hand out some acorns and see if that lures him out. So she puts one in front of the cage, and another totally strange squirrel bounces out of nowhere, steals that one, runs off. So David says, "It's okay, try again." And then within minutes, Lucy's sprayed out almost all of the acorns she has, and there's like 10 different squirrels jumping around, hanging out. And in the chaos of it all, Conker jumps off the wall, and then near one of the big oak trees, there was also a rock that he could hide under. So he's hiding next to the rock, watching all of this chaos go on around him. He's not sure what to do. Everybody's sitting there watching him, thinking that they need to intervene and help. But Sophie tells him not to interfere because nature needs to take its way, and he can't, and David's not going to be there at all times. Liz agrees, and they sit there and watch in nerves. There's a bigger squirrel coming down the tree, the one that had chased them in David's story in the first time David had went to the library. Watching the bigger squirrel come down the tree directed towards Conker, they were unsure of what to do. David told Lucy to throw out the last acorn to try and distract the other squirrel. As they did, the big squirrel watched what happened and hopped on top of the rock that Conker was hiding next to. Another squirrel came through and tried to steal the nut that was in front of Conker. The big squirrel jumped down, attacked the random squirrel that came in, and then right back up onto his rock, letting Conker take the nut and eat it in peace. Everybody watched that in amazement and agreed that that was that squirrel protecting Conker. David got a flash of inspiration and decided that he knows what this character is going to be, and it's going to be Conker's dad. Lucy gets excited, and they all start getting ready to head back. That brings us to the end of this chapter. It's a pretty cool scene. If I was them, I probably would have ended up just keeping at least Conker as a pet. I mean, it would be cool to have a squirrel that just jumped around the house. I don't know how clean it would be. It's technically a rodent, but I mean, if you keep it in the house and keep it washed, I don't see why it would be terrible. But this is probably the best all around for everybody, getting them to a place where it can be with other squirrels that has a huge food source. It's pretty well upkept. Nobody's going to be hurting them. There is that one gardener, right? What was his, something green fingers green, George something. Seeing that Sophie has put so much into this already, and she's committed a crime stealing these squirrels. I don't know if it's stealing them. They technically escaped, and she just caught them on the other side. But she did it without any permission and without anybody knowing. And they're knowingly releasing these pests out back into, technically the wild. So big things have happened. Liz has threatened to double David's rent if Lucy catches a charge. They all laugh in agreement. It's cool to see this big group becoming a little bit closer. I wonder if Sophie's going to be here for the long haul. It seems like they're introducing her, and if she's willing to go through these lengths, that she's got to be important. So we've only got a little bit left. Next episode will be hopefully a little bit different. We've technically got like 8 or 9 chapters, but since that's really like an episode and a half, I'm just going to throw it in, make one big one, and we'll go from there. So I might do an episode in between books 1 and 2. Shoot me some messages on what you'd want to hear on that. Theories, mythology on dragons or other mythical creatures that will be in this series to deal with. Other series to go more in depth on. Other interests. What would be something that you want to hear about? So I'd be interested to hear it. Give me an email at gadzooksTheLastDM@gmail.com. Looking forward to any questions, comments, and concerns. Fly safe, and no turbulence.